October 23, 1953. Chicago. Regal Theater. Backstage. Louis Armstrong stepped into the dressing room during intermission, reaching for a glass of water. He was sweating, exhausted, but happy. 12,000 people had just given him a standing ovation. Music was Louis's breath, his reason for living. And that evening, as always, he'd poured his soul onto that stage. The dressing room was empty. The other musicians hadn't left the stage yet. Louis filled his glass and sat in the corner. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath. Then the door opened. Louis lifted his head, and the man standing before him had the coldest eyes Louis had ever seen. Perfectly tailored suit, neatly combed hair, but his eyes held emptiness as if no soul existed behind them. The man walked in slowly and closed the door behind him. The lock's click echoed through the silence. Louis didn't stand, he simply watched. The man took several steps closer and stopped. Then he spoke. His voice was low but filled with menace. "Mr. Armstrong, we need to talk," Louis answered calmly. "I don't know you." The man smiled, but the smile carried no warmth. "You don't need to know me, but I know you, and in this city nobody does anything without my permission." Louis understood. This man belonged to that type, those who do anything for power. But was Louis afraid? No, because Louis Armstrong had faced fear his entire life. Racism, poverty, humiliation. And every time, Louis had learned something. Fear can only control you if you allow it. That evening, Louis was about to teach this man a lesson he'd never forget. What happened next would haunt that man for decades. And years later, he would write a letter, an apology letter, because what Louis Armstrong said that night would burn in that man's conscience forever. But nobody in that dressing room, not even Louis himself, could predict that this moment would change not one life, but two. Before we dive into this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. What you're about to witness is one of the most courageous moments in Louis Armstrong's life, a moment that proves true power doesn't come from threats, but from integrity. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news, books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. To understand what happened that October evening, we need to go back several weeks. We need to understand the pressure Louis Armstrong was under in 1953. Because that backstage confrontation wasn't just about one threatening man, it was about a lifetime of people trying to control Louis, trying to own him, trying to break his spirit, and every time, Louis had refused. September 19th, 1953. New York City. Louis sat in his manager's office listening to a proposal that made his stomach turn. A major club owner in Chicago wanted Louis to play exclusively at his venues for 6 months. The money was substantial, more than Louis had ever been offered, but there was a condition buried in the contract's fine print. Louis would have to give up creative control. The club owner would decide what songs Louis played, when he played them, even how he dressed on stage. Louis's manager, Joe Glazer, thought it was a great deal. "Louis, this kind of money could set you up for years. Think about it." But Louis shook his head. "Joe, I've spent my whole life fighting for the right to play my music my way. I'm not selling that now, not for any amount of money." This wasn't the first time Louis had faced this choice. Throughout his career, people with power had tried to control him. Record executives who wanted him to sound more commercial, promoters who wanted him to act a certain way, club owners who treated musicians like property. And every time, Louis had drawn a line. There were things money couldn't buy. Dignity was one, artistic freedom was another. Joe Glazer sighed. "Louis, these people don't like being told no. If you refuse, they might make things difficult." Louis looked his manager in the eye. "Joe, things have always been difficult. That's nothing new, but I won't let anybody own me. My music is mine. My voice is mine. And I'm keeping it that way." Louis left that meeting knowing he'd made powerful enemies, but he also left knowing he'd stayed true to himself. What Louis didn't know was that those enemies were more dangerous than he thought. and they were about to make their move in Chicago. October 1st, 1953. Louis arrived in Chicago for a 2-week residency at the Regal Theater. Chicago was special to Louis. He'd lived there in the 1920s, playing with King Oliver's band, learning from the masters, becoming the musician he was destined to be. The city held memories, some beautiful, some painful, but all significant. The Regal Theater was one of Chicago's premier venues for black entertainers. Over 3,000 seats, magnificent architecture, a stage where legends were born. Louis was excited to perform there. He'd sold out every show. Tickets were gone within hours. Chicago loved Louis Armstrong, and Louis loved Chicago back. But beneath the city's jazz clubs and concert halls, another Chicago existed. A darker Chicago. A Chicago controlled by organized crime. Clubs, theaters, restaurants, all operated under the watchful eye of men who believed they owned the city. And when someone as successful as Louis Armstrong came to town, those men took notice. October 5th, Louis's opening night at the Regal. The show was spectacular. Louis played for 2.5 hours, giving everything he had. The audience was on their feet, screaming for more. Backstage afterward, Louis met with fans, signed autographs, posed for photographs. He was gracious, warm, genuine. That was Louis's way, but one man in the crowd that night wasn't a fan. He was watching, studying, calculating. His name was Vincent Calabrese, and he had a message to deliver to Louis Armstrong. Vincent Calabrese was 48 years old in 1953. He'd grown up on Chicago's South Side, fighting his way up through the ranks of the city's criminal organizations. By the 50s, he controlled significant territory: nightclubs, gambling operations, protection rackets. Vincent was known for 2 things: his business acumen and his ruthlessness. He didn't threaten idly. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. When Vincent Calabrese said something would happen, it happened. But Vincent had a problem in October 1953. Several club owners he controlled were losing money because Louis Armstrong was performing at the Regal Theater instead of their venues. People wanted to see Louis, so they went to the Regal. Vincent's club sat half empty. That meant less money, and Vincent didn't accept less money. So Vincent decided to have a conversation with Mr. Armstrong, a conversation about how business worked in Chicago, a conversation about respecting the people who ran the city. Vincent waited. He watched Louis' schedule. He learned the patterns, intermissions, backstage movements, security gaps. And on October 23rd, Vincent found his moment. That evening's show was packed as usual. Louis performed brilliantly, as he always did. During intermission, Louis headed backstage alone. The other musicians stayed on stage, preparing for the second half. That's when Vincent made his move. He walked past security with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere. Nobody questioned him, nobody stopped him. People who knew Vincent's reputation knew better than to get in his way. Vincent reached Louis' dressing room, took a breath, opened the door, and stepped inside. Louis was sitting in the corner, drinking water, eyes closed. He looked peaceful, vulnerable. Vincent closed the door and locked it. The sound made Louis open his eyes. For a moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. Louis saw a well-dressed man in his late 40s, strong build, cold expression. Vincent saw Louis Armstrong, the legend, the star, the man everyone loved. And Vincent felt something unexpected, a flash of admiration. He'd heard Louis play earlier in the evening. Even Vincent, who claimed not to care about music, had been moved. Louis's trumpet had a quality that transcended entertainment. It touched something deeper, but Vincent pushed that feeling aside. He was here for business, not art. "Mr. Armstrong," Vincent said, "we need to talk." Louis remained seated. "I don't know you." Vincent's smile was thin. "You don't need to know me, but I know you. And in this city, nobody makes money without my permission." Louis felt his heartbeat quicken, not from fear, from recognition. He'd met men like this before, men who believed power meant controlling others, men who thought money gave them the right to own people. Louis had promised himself long ago that he'd never bow to such men. Vincent walked closer. "You're doing very well here, sold-out shows, big money, but you're hurting some of my business interests. My clubs are empty because everyone's at the Regal watching you." Louis listened but didn't respond. Vincent continued. "So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to add some shows at my clubs, private performances, and you're going to give me a percentage of your earnings while you're in my city. Call it a consulting fee." Louis finally spoke. His voice was calm. "And if I don't?" Vincent's expression hardened. "Then you won't perform in Chicago again. I'll make sure of it. Every venue, every club, every theater, you'll be blacklisted. And, Mr. Armstrong, I have connections in other cities, too. You make me angry, and your career gets very difficult." The threat hung in the air. Vincent was used to this part. The moment when people realized he had power over them. The moment when they broke, when they agreed, when they submitted. But Louis Armstrong didn't break. Instead, he did something Vincent didn't expect. Louis stood up slowly, not aggressively, just deliberately. He looked Vincent in the eye. And he smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a mocking smile, a sad smile. The smile of someone who'd seen this pattern too many times. "Mr. Calabresi," Louis said quietly. Vincent blinked. "How do you know my name?" Louis's smile widened slightly. "I've been in Chicago a long time. I know who runs what. I know your reputation. And I know why you're here." Vincent recovered his composure. "Good. Then you understand this isn't a negotiation." Louis nodded. "You're right. It's not a negotiation. Because there's nothing to negotiate. I'm not giving you anything. Have you ever stood up to someone more powerful than you? What gave you the courage? Share your thoughts in the comments." Vincent's face flushed. Nobody refused him. Nobody. "You're making a mistake, Armstrong. A big one." Louis's voice remained calm, but something in his tone changed. It became firmer, stronger. "Let me tell you about mistakes, Mr. Calabresi. I grew up in New Orleans, poorest neighborhood you can imagine. My mother worked cleaning white people's houses. She was exploited, disrespected, paid almost nothing. I watched her dignity get chipped away every single day." Louis took a step closer. "When I was just a boy, I made a promise. I promised myself that when I had a voice, I'd use it. When I had power, I wouldn't abuse it. And I'd never let anyone own me the way my mother was owned by people who had money." Vincent tried to interrupt, but Louis held up his hand. "I'm not finished. You think you have power because you control clubs, because you can threaten people, because you can make life difficult for those who don't obey. But that's not real power, Mr. Calabresi. That's fear. And fear is the weakest foundation there is." Louis's eyes locked with Vincent's. "Real power is knowing who you are and refusing to compromise that for anything. Real power is standing up even when standing up costs you everything. Real power is playing your trumpet because you love it, not because someone pays you or threatens you." Vincent felt something he rarely experienced: uncertainty. This wasn't going according to plan. "Armstrong, you're being foolish. I'm offering you a way to keep working, to keep making money. All I'm asking is a small percentage." Louis shook his head. "You're not asking for a percentage of my money. You're asking for a piece of my soul. You're asking me to admit that you own me. And I won't do that. Not for you. Not for anyone." Louis walked to the small table and picked up his trumpet. He held it gently, reverently. "This trumpet is my voice. Every note I play is a piece of who I am. My mother, my struggles, my joy, my pain, my freedom. If I let you control when and where I play, if I let you take money from what I earn with this instrument, then I'm not free anymore. I'm owned. And I'd rather stop playing entirely than live like that." The conviction in Louis's voice shook something in Vincent. For the first time in years, Vincent Calabresi felt something close to shame. He'd built his empire on intimidation, on making people afraid, on crushing those who resisted. But standing before him was a man who simply wouldn't be crushed, a man who valued something more than money, more than safety, more than comfort. Vincent didn't know what to say. In his world, everyone had a price. Everyone could be bought or threatened into compliance. But Louis Armstrong was different. Please consider subscribing to our channel. Louis Armstrong's story deserves to be told, and your support helps us share these powerful moments with the world. Louis placed his trumpet back on the table. When he turned to Vincent again, his expression had softened. "Mr. Calabresi, I don't hate you. I don't even blame you. You're doing what you think you have to do. You're operating in a world where power is everything. But let me tell you what I've learned. The things you get by hurting people, by controlling people, by making people afraid, those things don't last. They crumble. But the things you build with integrity, with honesty, with respect, those things endure. Louis walked to the door and unlocked it. I'm going back out there to finish my show. I'm going to play my trumpet for those 12,000 people who paid to see me. And when I'm done, I'm going to sleep well, because I'll know I stayed true to myself. Can you say the same? Vincent stood there, speechless. Nobody had ever spoken to him like this. Nobody had ever turned down his offers and walked away. Louis opened the door. You're welcome to stay and listen to the second half. Maybe you'll understand what I'm talking about, what music really means, what freedom really is. Then Louis Armstrong walked out, leaving Vincent Calabrese alone in that dressing room, staring at nothing, his entire worldview shaking. Vincent didn't leave. He stood there for several minutes, processing what had just happened. Then, almost against his will, he walked back toward the theater. He found a spot in the wings where he could watch without being seen. Louis returned to the stage to thunderous applause. He picked up his trumpet, and he played. Vincent had heard music before. He'd owned nightclubs for decades, but he'd never really listened. Music was background noise, a commodity, something to sell. But that night, listening to Louis Armstrong play, Vincent heard something different. He heard passion, he heard pain, he heard joy, he heard freedom. Every note Louis played seemed to carry weight, meaning, purpose. It wasn't just sound, it was communication, soul speaking to soul. Vincent found himself moved in a way he couldn't explain. By the time Louis finished his set with a powerful rendition of When the Saints Go Marching In, Vincent's eyes were wet. He wiped them quickly, embarrassed. He'd come to that theater to threaten a man, to assert dominance, to collect money. But he was leaving with something else, a question he'd never asked himself before. What am I really doing with my life? Vincent left the Regal Theater that night without speaking to Louis again. He went home to his expensive apartment, poured himself a drink, and sat in the dark, thinking. For the first time in 20 years, Vincent Calabrese questioned everything. The next morning, Vincent did something unprecedented. He called off all actions against Louis Armstrong. His associates were confused. "Boss, the guy refused you. We have to do something." Vincent shook his head. "Leave him alone. He's not bothering anybody." "But boss, he disrespected you." Vincent's voice was firm. "No, he respected himself. There's a difference. Now drop it." Louis Armstrong finished his 2-week residency at the Regal Theater without any further incidents. He never knew that Vincent had called off potential retaliation. He never knew that his words had affected Vincent so deeply. Louis simply continued doing what he always did, playing his music, living his truth, standing firm in his values. Years passed. Louis's career continued to flourish. He traveled the world, played for presidents and kings, became one of the most beloved entertainers in history. Vincent Calabrese's life took a different path. He didn't leave the criminal world immediately. That kind of exit wasn't easy. But he changed how he operated. He became less ruthless, more thoughtful. He started questioning the harm he caused. In 1968, 15 years after that night at the Regal Theater, Vincent was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Doctors gave him 6 months. Vincent knew his time was ending, and he thought about Louis Armstrong. He thought about that conversation, those words, that moment when someone refused to be owned. Vincent, who'd never apologized for anything in his life, felt the need to write a letter. It took him 3 weeks to compose it. He wrote draft after draft, trying to express something he'd never put into words before: regret, admiration, gratitude. Finally, on November 3, 1968, Vincent mailed the letter to Louis Armstrong's home address. The letter was 7 pages long, handwritten, brutally honest. It began, "Dear Mr. Armstrong, you don't know me, but we met once, October 23, 1953, backstage at the Regal Theater in Chicago. I was the man who tried to threaten you. I'm writing this letter because I'm dying, and I need to tell you something. That night changed my life. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, like water wearing down stone. What you said to me about power, about freedom, about dignity, I couldn't forget it. I tried to. I told myself you were naive, foolish, but your words stayed with me. Every time I hurt someone, every time I took money that wasn't earned honestly, every time I used fear to control people, your words were there, reminding me that I was building nothing, just taking, just destroying. I want you to know that in the years since that night, I changed. Not enough. Not completely. But I tried. I started treating people differently. I gave money to causes that helped instead of hurt. I looked at myself in the mirror and asked if I was proud of who I saw. Usually the answer was no. But I kept asking. Your courage that night, standing up to me when you had every reason to be afraid, the courage inspired something in me I didn't know existed. A desire to be better. I'm writing this letter because I want to thank you. And I want to apologize. Thank you for showing me that there are things more valuable than power. That integrity matters. That how you treat people defines who you are. And I apologize for trying to take something from you that night. Your freedom. Your dignity. I'm grateful you refused. Sincerely, Vincent Calabrese. Louis received the letter in November 1968. He read it 3 times. Then he sat quietly for a long while, thinking about that October night 15 years earlier. He'd forgotten Vincent's name. He'd forgotten the specific threats, but he remembered the principle, the choice he'd made. Louis wrote back. His letter was shorter but equally heartfelt. Dear Mr. Calabrese, thank you for your letter. I remember our meeting, and I'm grateful to know that something I said mattered. We all make choices in life, some good, some bad. What defines us isn't the mistakes we make, but whether we learn from them, whether we try to be better. You've tried. That takes courage, too. As you face what's ahead, I want you to know that I hold no anger toward you, only respect for your honesty and your willingness to change. May you find peace. Louis Armstrong. Vincent received Louis's response on December 1st, 1968. He died 3 weeks later. But, according to his daughter, who shared this story years afterward, her father died with Louis's letter on his bedside table. He'd read it every day. It brought him comfort and perhaps redemption. This story reminds us that we never know the full impact of our words and actions. Louis Armstrong stood up for his principles that October night, not knowing that his courage would change a life. Vincent Calabrese threatened Louis not knowing that he'd meet someone who couldn't be threatened. 2 men, 2 very different lives, 1 transformative moment. Today, both Louis Armstrong and Vincent Calabrese are gone, but their story remains. A testament to the power of integrity, the importance of standing firm in your values, the possibility that even the hardest hearts can be touched by truth. Louis Armstrong never sought recognition for what he did that night. He didn't tell the story publicly. It was just one of thousands of moments in his life where he chose dignity over convenience, principles over profit, freedom over fear. But for Vincent Calabrese, that moment was everything. It was the crack that let light into his darkness, the voice that questioned his choices, the example that showed him a different way to live. Years after both men died, Vincent's daughter donated his letter to the Smithsonian Institution. She wanted people to know that her father, despite his many failures, had been capable of change, that he'd been moved by Louis Armstrong's courage, that in his final months he'd tried to make amends. The letter now sits in the museum's archives, a reminder that redemption is possible, that courage inspires, that standing up for what's right matters even when we can't see the results, especially when we can't see the results. Tonight, somewhere, someone faces a choice similar to the one Louis Armstrong faced. Stand firm or submit. Maintain integrity or take the easy path. Speak truth or stay silent. Louis's example shows us what's possible when we choose courage, when we refuse to be owned, when we value freedom more than safety. And Vincent's story shows us that even those who seem unreachable can be reached. Even the hardest hearts can soften. Even the most lost souls can find their way back. That October night in Chicago, in a locked dressing room at the Regal Theater, 2 men had a conversation that would echo through decades. One man tried to take, the other refused to give, and in that refusal, something beautiful happened. Not immediately, not obviously, but deeply, profoundly, eternally. Louis Armstrong walked out of that room and continued his life, playing his trumpet, spreading joy, standing firm. Vincent Calabrese walked out of that room and began slowly, painfully, to become someone different, someone better, and 15 years later, a dying man found the courage to write 7 pages of truth, to thank the person who'd shown him what courage looked like, to apologize for trying to steal something that could never be stolen. A soul that belonged only to itself. That's Louis Armstrong's legacy. Not just the music, magnificent as it was, not just the performances, legendary as they were, but the moments like this. Private, powerful, transformative, when one man's integrity touched another man's conscience and planted a seed that would grow for 15 years until it blossomed into redemption. That's the Louis Armstrong the world needs to remember. The man who couldn't be bought, couldn't be threatened, couldn't be owned. The man who understood that true freedom means staying true to yourself, no matter the cost, no matter the threat, no matter what. And in doing so, he freed not just himself, but the man who tried to imprison him. That's power, real power, the kind that endures.